Ambrose Little. The J, very secret. No one can know about it. First of all, let me apologize. I was really glad that Microsoft gave me the opportunity to be here and scheduled me at this time on Friday, because that gave me a few days to track down and catch a cold. So if I sound a little weird, a little bit like Popeye sometimes, that's part of the reason, at least. I normally sound like Popeye anyways. But so that's why I have tea here. And speaking of stimulating drinks, I hope you all have a stimulating drink to help you get through the session. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're talking about advancing your design with UX design patterns. First of all, how many people here would self-identify as a developer? Okay. Designer of some kind? Looks like maybe about 50-50. All right, now who here feels like they know generically what a design pattern is? All right. Specifically UX kind of design patterns? Okay, cool. So the question naturally comes about, I guess most people here know what patterns are, so maybe you sort of know why we would want to use them, but why talk about UX design patterns? Well, the simple answer is because, dude, they're out there. I don't know, are there any fans of Bill and Ted? Excellent. Yeah, so whether or not we recognize them as such and whether or not we talk about them as such, design patterns are out there, and really the point of thinking and talking about them is so that we can better formulate designs, and so that's the kind of the essence of where we're going with this. Does anyone recognize this book? Cool. So who here has heard of the Gang of Four? All right, I bet that's how most people know about design patterns. They actually took this guy, his name's Christopher Alexander. He is a real-world physical, architect. Not that software isn't real, but it isn't. And this guy, back in like the late 70s, came out with this series of books, and this was kind of the first one, the foundational one, called The Timeless Way of Building. And it's where he formulated his and expounded his theory on this idea of patterns and a pattern language. And he was speaking in terms of physical architecture, but of course, those of you who are familiar with Gang of Four know that we've kind of adopted those patterns. In fact, it's funny because it seems like more in the software community are more kind of attached to patterns than people in the physical architecture community. But what was he going for? What was the key thing that he wanted to get across? And that's that the use of patterns and a pattern language are just sort of a means to an end. And that end is to achieve what he called the quality without a name. Has anyone ever heard of that term? Okay. So it's funny now because now you could say that the quality without a name is the name of that quality. But anyways, what all these words are: alive, whole, comfortable, free, exact, egoless, eternal. These are all, like he says, they're all related to this quality, but none of them quite hits the mark. So it's one of those things that you sort of have to get an understanding of without actually having like a good denotation for it. So that's really the point of using patterns, and in general, and specifically in design patterns, is to achieve this quality, to make what you build have that quality without a name. So, enter software design patterns. This is probably familiar to most of you. Of course, it's not the only book or resource out there on design patterns. There's quite a few out there that have been written over the years. More recently, some in this particular space are these two books on top here. And Designing Interfaces, has anyone heard of that? Has anyone read it? Cool. Does anyone like it? No, it was a good book. It's a really good book. In fact, a lot of what we're talking about, builds on some of her work. That's Jennifer Tidwell, and then some of the other people out there in the patterns community. So many people talk about patterns, and especially in software, it's dangerous because you can get this thing they call patternitis, which is inflammation of the pattern. But actually, it's a real problem, I guess, because if you focus so much on the tool, which is a pattern, or the words and the language and all that stuff, you can kind of lose sight of what we were talking about just a second ago, which is the whole point of this is to get this quality without a name. And the patterns are not the only way to do that. It's just one way to kind of learn how to design better. Then the problem is, though, is that people who go and they talk about, pattern, then people start thinking, oh, well, it's just a buzzword, or it's just something I can safely ignore because, everybody thinks that patterns have to be everywhere, even though they are. But I don't have to think about it in terms of patterns. But you have to be careful. The reason is patterns, they can seem obvious, but there's actually quite a lot of depth to them, more depth than you might expect. There's a nice stereotypical approach there of the iceberg, very superficial on the top, but there's a lot of depth. So there's multiple ways to kind of think and talk about patterns. And this is kind of, the little white boxes there are what you would call the sort of the Alexandrian way, and that's that guy who I mentioned at the top. He kind of came up with these little categories of things you can say about patterns. And so you have a name, that's kind of obvious. The name is the name of the pattern. A problem or a problem statement, that is a very concise formulation of the kind of the issue, the underlying situation that you find yourself in that calls for a pattern potentially. The solution is, again, a concise, brief statement of what you do in order to implement the pattern. So taken together with that thing up there that I call the iconic visualization, you can look at that and you can get an understanding of what a pattern is. So once you understand and you know what it is, the question is, okay, so when would I use it or why would I use it? And that's where you kind of go to that next level of getting a deeper understanding. The context is there to give you the extra kind of bits of information, conditions, situations that you need to consider before you might think about using this pattern. And then the rationale kind of takes it to the next level, and it does what it sounds like. It explains the rationale behind the pattern. So the reason that you would want to do this, because theoretically, you could just go from what to how and start doing the pattern. But if you do that, the thing with patterns is that they're not like algorithms. You can't just feed in the same numbers and always get the same solution at the end of it. The really key thing about the patterns is that they can have multiple implementations, and it's all conditioned by the context in which you implement them. So if you're going to implement a pattern, it really helps to have that deeper understanding and understand why it works, because that's going to inform how you then go and do your own implementation of the pattern. Once you have it, and you don't have to go in this kind of sequence, but this is just one way of talking about it. But once you kind of have that understanding, you know what it is, you know when to use it, maybe you've decided that this is the pattern that I want to use, then you need to know how to do it. So that's where these last two sections come in handy. The implementation is just a verbal description, or maybe, if it had to do with code, maybe it would have code or something like that in there. But it's a description of how you would go about implementing the pattern, any extra considerations that you might want to think about while you're implementing that pattern. The other part of the how or the using is to look at the examples. Now, the examples are interesting in themselves because they actually contribute to sort of like all three of these. They give you an idea maybe specifically how you might go about implementing something, but they also help you to get a deeper understanding. Just by looking at lots of examples, you will start to get this, deeper cognition about what the pattern actually is. So you can talk about patterns all you want, but there's sort of like this deeper understanding that you can only get by kind of seeing it happen and seeing it in action. And that's when the examples can be really handy. So this is just an example of one of the patterns in our catalog, something we're going to talk about soon called quince. And you can kind of get a sense that there's a little depth to these patterns. There's actually quite a bit of breadth too, but that's kind of a given, I guess you could say, considering that the patterns are out there, they're everywhere. This is just a screenshot. You'll see the real thing in action, but it's showing you all the different tags and some of the relationships between the tags, and it just gives you a sense that there is a breadth. So I'd like to take a few minutes to actually look at a few of the patterns that we've cataloged and found out there in some of the other catalogs, and to give you a better concrete example of what patterns are. So first, we'll talk about finding your way around. This tag, if it was going to be a tag, it would be navigation, but essentially, it's about being able to get from here to there. First pattern we'll talk about is faceted navigation. Has anyone heard of this pattern? That's good. Has anyone seen this particular example? Nobody shops at Amazon? You ignore it. Actually, what's done here is this is on the left side. I think it's still on the left side anyways. And when you search for a product, it gives you the list, and you can pick those. So faceted navigation, the problem that you're trying to solve is that people have a general rough idea of what they want. They want a camera, let's say. And so they go and they search camera on Amazon, Super simple, just type in a quick search. You get this 3,000 item result set, potentially, maybe more, maybe less. And then they're like, well, how do I make sense of all this information? How do I find the one that really works for me? Well, there's multiple ways to achieve that, but one way is this idea of faceted navigation. And really what it is it's identifying different common facets in your information set and then allowing people to progressively, and that's the key thing, progressively filter a result set down to find what they're looking for. So in the example here from Amazon, you've got things like brand, seller, price, megapixels, because we're talking about cameras. So there's a couple of these facets that you can imagine are like global across all of Amazon, things like price and brand. But then there's some that are specific to what the person actually searched on. So I think Amazon is really the leader in pioneering this kind of approach to navigation. And one of the other nice things to consider in their particular example is that you've got not just the facets, and you can select multiple facets, which, by the way, if you do allow multiple selection, people usually think of it as an and operation, so it's not like an or. So the other thing is that it tells you, and it updates those numbers. If you picked Kodak, you would get 26 results. And so that's a specific thing in implementing this pattern. You don't have to do that. But in their case, it really makes a lot of sense, because if I'm looking and I don't really know what I want, I'm more likely to maybe pick one with 26 items, right? So that I can see that instead of having to sort of drill down and go back up. This thing that Jared Spool calls pogo sticking, which is really bad. So that helps with that. Another example, which is pretty similar, has anyone seen Kayak? Anyone use it? It's pretty cool, right? Kayak is another site where you can search for flights and other things. What they do, though, is instead of like it being a service, they actually give you all the facets to search against the actual like providers, like Continental Airline, and American and things like that. And once you're to the point where you're ready to buy, you go and you buy it from them. So they're not like in between; they're just facilitating, helping you find this stuff. The interesting thing here again is on the left, you've got faceted navigation. So when you first come in here, you type, I want to go from Newark to Las Vegas. This is what I did. And you set, the date range or something like that. Some very minimal upfront information, because the thing is with faceted navigation, as opposed to, has anyone ever seen an advanced search page where you have, 3,000 fields and people are like, I don't know what I want to put in these things. And so this is sort of like the inverse of that, where instead of expecting people to know up front what they want and what they want to filter by, you let them progressively do it. And that's what they do here. You can filter later by stops, airlines, and it immediately, because they're using Ajax, they immediately update the result sets. There's actually a related pattern called active filtering that has a similar approach, but the goal with active filtering is you're looking at a big data set, usually some kind of analysis, where this is more like you're trying to find something specific. They both kind of imply this, progressive, real quick. You don't want people to have to wait 5-10 seconds every time they select a facet. So that's another piece of context that you would need to know. Like if my particular back end or whatever couldn't supply me with the information from a query within, like a second, then this might not be the right pattern for you. In Quince, we also use faceted navigation. Has anyone heard of Quince before coming in here? Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a demo, but essentially Quince is a UX Patterns Explorer, and so you'll see some examples from it there. But this one is from the All Patterns page, and you can see on the right-hand side there, we've got the ability to filter by tag. So you do say, like you could go to All Patterns, or you could do a keyword search, and you get a result set. And then you say, well, I just want to see the builders and editors within this particular set. We also have alphanumeric filtering, which is another pattern up there at the top. Another one of my favorite patterns is clear entry points. You know, Microsoft with Live Search really pioneered this space. No, I'm just kidding. There is another search provider out there who you may have heard of, but since this is a Microsoft conference, clear entry points, right. So the key thing with clear entry points that you're trying to help people is you want to help people understand what are the kind of like the key common core tasks or goals or things like that that they would want to achieve with your particular piece of software. And one way to do that is this thing called clear entry points. So the essence of the pattern is that you kind of get rid of all this stuff that you can do while you're in the application, and right when people enter, you say, here, look, this is probably what you want to do. In the case of search, it's a pretty safe guess that people want to search, right? So you give them the search box up front, up center, and center, and then it's even better because, you know, of course, they focus the cursor in there, so you don't have to click. But then you can also do some kind of like related ancillary things to your primary task. In this case, you might want to search web. That's probably the most common thing, so that's the default. That's good defaults is another pattern. Or you might want to search images, videos, or whatever. And then way around the edges, you know, they're not preventing you from doing these other things, but they're really trying to help you get started with the most likely thing that you want to do. This is an example within the context of a particular application. This is from Blend. Has anyone ever seen this dialogue? How many of you use it and like it? How many of you hate these kinds of things? That's funny. Yeah, there's a few people who feel very vehemently against clear entry points. But that's why there's a little checkbox at the bottom there that says, hey, don't show this to me when I start up next time. So that's a good thing. So when you're implementing patterns and looking at examples, you know, one of the things you look at is these small things that really kind of add value. And that's where the examples really can add a lot of value in addition to just giving you a sense of the pattern. If you didn't see that, you may not ever consider that you want to, you know, maybe add a little checkbox that lets people turn that off. Or maybe you would, who knows. But having these examples within the context of the patterns, and probably like in the implementation, it might actually say, you know, you need to think about if you should add a run at startup or, you know, show this again kind of dialogue. Anyway, so here they've identified that projects, help, and samples are like the core things that you might be interested in. Then you've got the next most common thing within the projects is you're probably going to want to open something you were recently working on. So that's kind of front and center. And then the next three options are related to starting a new or opening one. So really the key thing in terms of implementing this pattern is you have to understand, especially if you have a fairly complex website or a complex application, you have to understand what are the top, you know, in maybe 4 or 5 most common things that people are going to want to do. And then you facilitate that with the clear entry points pattern. If you can't identify that, you don't have the data, then this would be a bad thing to do because you're going to just tick people off because it's just going to get in their way. So it really takes understanding what people want to do with your particular piece of software. And of course, in Quince, since it is one of my favorite patterns, I use it. For us, it was kind of easy because there are a limited number of things you can do. So it didn't take a lot to really understand what people would want to do because this is what you can do. Another kind of area of patterns that you could think about is called organizing things on a page. Now, I say page here, but for me, I'm kind of, ambivalent about the term page because it's sort of web-centric or, you know, even document-centric. Really, it's organizing things on a view. So a view is like just a coherent set of visual things, you know. So one of these things where you understand it better through examples, dialogues, windows, panels, pages. So really that's what this is talking about. Pattern called titled sections. This is from time immemorial really because The problem is that you can very easily get overwhelmed with a lot of information. Just imagine this page here if it was just basically straight text, right? No different colors, no bolding, no nothing like that. Think how overwhelming it would be to try to understand what that was about. So titled sections, it solves that problem by creating groups, meaningful groups of information, and then giving them meaningful titles. And it creates a visual hierarchy so that people can quickly glance over, understand what's on there, and drill into the pieces that they're interested in. In this particular example, they've got actually more or less 2 levels of hierarchy. It's on a grid layout. Speakers, underbar, so the thing with the underbar, the darker, so that's the first kind of way they offset it. They use white space, which is usually better than, say, using lines or boxes of some kind, depending on your context, of course, because that makes your design more busy. Anyway, so they use that for like the higher level, and then they have the bolded bluish stuff for the other titled sections, which are also offset. You can also see the little more. I don't know if you can see it actually, but if you visited the site, the little more links, you see that everywhere. That's a pattern. It's called Extras on Demand. This is from Infragistics. It's just a different way to do titled sections. You see, like on the bottom right there, in this particular design, our designers felt it looked good to have like little island boxes to set off the sections, and then of course we give them meaningful titles. And it helps people to quickly glance over and say, I'm not interested in additional navigation, but I am maybe in the recent forum posts. Now this one, so those are both sort of webby examples of titled sections. It's obviously not limited to the web. Has anyone ever used a group box? Right, so that's essentially the idea there. In this case, you see the tab navigation at the top. The primary level there is the settings. It's the same font in this case, but they're using the line and the indent to set off the sections. So you can start to get a feel, like by looking at all these examples, you understand the pattern, and then you see all these ways to do it, and you kind of formulate what works best in your context. Here they have, the little icons. So there's another layer of titled sections inside of the little dialogue scroll box there. And they use icons in addition to indenting in that case. Another common pattern for organizing stuff is this thing called liquid layout. Has anyone ever heard of that before? Well, so fluid layout, it's kind of the same thing. So the general idea, the problem here is that, especially like in software, like on desktops and laptops and things like that, you have n number of possible, form factors. And then even especially with Windows that let you resize, that's another kind of layer on top of that. So you could have multiple devices, multiple possible monitors, things like that. And the problem is that people want to be able to take advantage of whatever their device is, right? Whatever they're viewing your content through, they want it to be optimized for that. And so liquid layout is one way to achieve that. What you do is you identify sections of your view that can be sort of cordoned off as like containers. And then within those containers, you treat the content in those containers as if it were a liquid. So you know how, from science class, the old, what does containers do? They, a liquid takes on the shape of its container, right? So that's why it's called liquid layout, because your content will take on the shape of its container. And it's implemented in many different ways. In this particular way, you see there's a horizontal scroll bar. And then in the first one, so this is like 2 states, right? Someone's resized it. On the first one, the scroll bar is, kind of smaller. You see, I didn't count, maybe 12, something like that, lines across there. And then when they resize, what they're doing is the liquid goes down. So you get more items this way, less scrolling this way. It's far more common like in websites and things like that, because horizontal scroll bars are evil, right? To do the sort of the other way, which is, you would reduce the amount of vertical scrolling and increase the amount of things showing up horizontally. Outlook, Office, especially the ribbon. This isn't a shot of the ribbon, but this is the toolbar context here. So there's a few things going on here in terms of liquid layout. The first one was probably most obvious if you were to be experiencing this and you had, Outlook open and you resize, is that the reading pane is very visibly gets smaller and smaller, but the thing in the middle, the list of messages, stays essentially the same size. And the reason for that is like the makers of Outlook said, you know what? The most important thing in this particular view is that people be able to see the list of things in their inbox and then act on them somehow. If they can't read them in the reading pane, or if it's hard to read, big deal. They can double-click and open and see the full thing. So they thought about that, and they said, okay, for our case, liquid layout means we'll resize the reading pane and leave that list concretely, kind of anchored. Up top, too, with the toolbars, as it gets smaller, there's no scroll bars suddenly appearing, right? What happens is they go away, but they give you the little extras on demand indicator with the down arrow so you can get to more. The ribbon actually kind of takes this intelligent approach to sort of collapsing down for liquid layout even to the next level. And in Quince, we use liquid layout all over the place, actually, but in this particular situation, we've identified different containers, like in the modal panel there, and in the forms there, and up top in the header area there. We identify these sections and we say, hey, if the number of patterns in that section is too many to display, hide them, show a little extras on demand indicators so people can still get to them, but we still are optimizing, stuff's not running off the page and things like that. A more common thing for people to do and do all the time is like in CSS on the web, using float with individual items in a list so that as it gets wider, you get more items showing up horizontally. We did that in our all patterns view as well. So we've looked at a few different kinds of patterns so far. We looked at navigation. We've looked at some ways to organize stuff. As people feel like they're starting to get a sense of how these patterns work and what they are. Does anyone have any questions at this point? No? Okay, so we'll move on. Making sense of the sea of information. This is just another kind of type of pattern. It's really about visualizing lots of information. A very common pattern in this space is called dashboard. And the key problem with dashboard is that people need a high-level, sort of top-level, consumable overview of the information that they're looking at or that they're interested in. And the way you solve that is you create that and you identify all these different high-level things. Maybe it's you create a graph of lots of quantitative information, or maybe you just have a list of the top 5 of whatever, and you display that to them. So in this case, this is actually from Stephen Few, who wrote a book on information dashboards. I highly recommend it. He has this example for a CIO dashboard, and he's organized it where the most important information is on the top left, and it sort of flows out from that. And you can see use of spark lines to really take advantage of the compact space, because one of the key things with a dashboard is that it's kind of there all on one page. People don't have to scroll or drill down, but they can drill down if they want to. Now this is sort of another kind of dashboard. You may not think of it as a dashboard, but all these web portals where you can customize all the widgets that you put on there, they're really a kind of dashboard. They're your personal dashboard of things that you're interested in. Now, in terms of implementing this, Windows Live didn't go out and interview everyone and come up with every possible thing that they might want to put on there and try to normalize that and give everyone the same dashboard. So what they did instead is they created sort of a platform for a dashboard, and then they leave it up to all the individual people who want to supply these widgets to think about these things that you would have to think about in a dashboard interface. What's the high-level indicators that I can provide? Sometimes KPIs or things like that. In this case, you see the weather and how it's visualized, the next few days or something like that. Stocks, just simple ticker kind of information. So they provide sort of a dashboard platform, and then it's up to all the individual vendors to come up with the appropriate visualizations for it. This is an example, again, so we went from sort of a domain-specific kind of dashboard where you would probably work very closely with your users and try to come up with what made sense for them and sort of craft it for them, to something totally open-ended. And this one is back again at a domain-specific one targeted at traders. This is a sample from Infragistics WPF stuff. You see, we use titled sections. use tab dialog over there on the graph. What are traders interested in? What are the most important things for them to keep kind of a finger on? Well, they want to see their watch list, stocks they're interested in, stocks they think they might want to bid on. So that's there, and then you quickly give them the ability to take action. Under that, pending orders, again, this is what I just did. I can cancel them down their order history. On the right, you get the real-time graph, which gives them a sense. Graphing is really about, understanding complex relationships, and in this case, it gives people a sense of, the activity that's going on in the market, and then they can flip over for historical view. So those are just some examples of dashboarding. Another possible pattern in this space is what they call overview plus detail. I'm waiting for security guards to come because I meant to do an example from virtual Earth here, but I guess they're going to let me keep talking. This is, so the kind of the essence here is that, you have some detailed level of information that people want to get to, but they don't want to feel, or they can feel lost if you don't sort of give them an overview of where they are in that information. So overview plus detail says, hey, have two different views. Maybe they're different windows. Maybe it's just overlaid. But in one view, the smaller view, you show your overview. And the bigger view, you show the detail. And then you show them in the overview where they are looking at the zoomed in area. So probably don't need to explain it, but the big area map here, you look over at the overview. The little box indicates what you're looking at in relation to the full map. So mapping is pretty common. Anyone who's played, Warcraft or anything like that, they implement this pattern too. Overview plus detail, another example, kind of the same thing, only in the context of a graphical application. This is Photoshop. Same concept there. They're just in different windows. And this one is a timeline. So it's a little bit different. Kind of, you can see how it's still the same pattern, but it's a different space. You might think overview plus detail is just for maps and just for images, but no, it can be any kind of thing where you can supply a high-level overview and then indicate, where you are in that. So in this case, it's just a timeline. You can grab the little bar at the bottom, slide it back and forth, and as you do that, it changes the detail at the top and vice versa. So again, we've looked at some navigation patterns. We've looked at some organizational, like how to organize things on a page. We've looked at how to deal with large sets of information. All those are great, and they're all sort of like specific, kind of unique, small pieces of an interface. You might call them UI design patterns, but when you get to sort of like the next level where you're thinking in terms of holistic UX and the idea of what is happening with people and software happening over a period of time, you get to these kind of patterns. So first one, it's called Visual Framework. This example from Zipcar is they use a very good consistency is key in terms of Visual Framework. So they use same colors, same kinds of navigation elements, same kind of corner treatments, which is another pattern. They use few hues pattern. All these different sort of pieces that make up the overall experience. And they don't just do that on the website. They take it into the brochures, they take it into the car. So really the core thing with the Visual Framework is it's a orientation device, first of all. It helps people to know, hey, I'm still where I thought I was, as they go through the different views in your application. But it's also a usability pattern because especially with things like navigational elements, or like if you think of dialogues, where you have moving buttons, usually the OK is on the right, but suddenly on this one dialogue it's on the left, and I accidentally click cancel instead of OK and lose my changes, something like that. So keeping a visual framework is good for orientation, it's good for usability. This has been around forever, as you might imagine. This is just a sample of an OS version of Visual Framework, right? So they established that all Windows will have this similar Chrome and that they'll all have the same buttons in the same place. OS X has it on the left, Windows on the right. And then, within Vista itself, for example, they take it to the next step where most of their dialogues have the back and forth and they have the kind of breadcrumb navigation. It's always in the same place. Same theme, colors, yeah, you can change your theme, but it affects pretty much all the windows. So it's a very strong visual framework. Again, Office, another great example of a strong visual framework. You go through all of their different products, which are very complex, complicated in terms of the amount of features and capabilities that they have. And yet, by creating a consistent visual framework, they make it where people, first of all, you look, if you just saw that top section, you would probably guess you're in Office somewhere. So there's the orientation, but it also establishes consistency for usability's sake. With the ribbon especially, most of them have a home and an insert. Lots of them have review and view. So, and where they inject stuff within the actual ribbons themselves, consistency, and creates a better experience overall. Another interaction design pattern is this general thing called transition. Now, the problem with transition is, like, in the digital world, say this loosely, it obviously is not 100% true, but the laws of physics don't exist, right? So things can just disappear and reappear, it's like magic, right? Well, the problem is that magic is not a good thing from a usability perspective. So transitions allow you to kind of connect the dots for people. They say, in this case, OS X is saying, look, this window that you just told me to kind of put to the side for now, this is where it's going to be. So it doesn't just disappear and appear there, and you don't know necessarily where it went. The Genie effect makes it painfully clear that's where it's going. Windows obviously has some transitions along those lines as well. Another kind of transition is zooming. So this particular case is a new thing from OneNote Canvas, and what they do is allow people to organize their notebooks and spatially as if it's like a sort of a desktop kind of thing, because it really takes advantage of the spatial memory that people have, just like you might put things in certain places around your desktop. So you click, it zooms in, instead of just zap, you're there. It gives you a sense that, yes, I'm going to this place, and then I can zoom back out. And it just helps people to feel more comfortable, more natural, and understand what's going on with the software. Transition, in this case, is that little, it's not very visible, but the little yellow bar. That's called a highlight transition. So this is from Basecamp, and you're building out your to-do list. You type in something, you click add. Well, it could add it, could not. Maybe I'm not paying attention. I don't see it show up in the list there. So in order to make that connection that says, yes, you actually did add it successfully, they have a little fade. Hey, look, you just added it. Here it is, and then it fades out. It's just another kind of transition. There are all kinds of transitions, and this is one of those patterns which is one of the interesting things about patterns is they can be sort of like hierarchical conceptually. So you can have a higher level transition pattern, say, and then maybe a lower level one that's focused specifically on one kind of transition. And the problem with the higher level ones is you could end up with 3,000 examples. So, in those cases, it is actually good to build those out. The other thing about transition, for example, some of the guidance you might expect when using a pattern is it might say things like, hey, most transitions in a user interface should probably be maybe 0.2 to 0.5 seconds long, especially, now with Silverlight and some of the AJAX frameworks and DHTML and all that. If you're not careful, you can really actually impede usability if you don't use transitions well and you don't do the timing. So really with transitions, I think the timing is everything. And there's no 100% one right answer with that. You need to put something in, start with a faster one, slow it down if you feel like it's happening so fast that people aren't able to perceive it. And there's a lot of psychology. There's a whole art, motion design that comes into this sort of thing. So it can be complicated, but even if you take a stab at it, tweak it, try to make it better, it can really help your users in terms of being able to understand what's going on with your software. And kind of the last pattern in this area that I would talk about is undo. How many of you have ever created as a developer, maybe even a designer, a confirmation box? Someone clicks delete and you say, are you sure you want to do that? Pretty much everyone, probably. Bad. No, confirmation dialogues are like only use them if you have no other choice, really. If you can support the undo pattern, it's way, way better. And the reason is that, I don't know, I'm just going to make up a statistic because that's what people do with those. 80% of people intend to do the action that they do, 80% of the time, right? So what you're doing is basically, for that edge case, everyone, every time they do something, has to go through the extra pain of saying, yes, that is what I wanted to do. So by eliminating that and supporting the undo pattern, which essentially is saying, hey, we'll let you, if you mess up, we'll let you go back and fix it. That's the kind of the core thing about undo. And actually, the rationale behind it is twofold. It's that, what I just talked about, which is kind of reducing the amount of pain and suffering and frustration that people have by having to always do extra actions just to get the thing that they wanted done in the first place accomplished. But it actually protects them against errors. So people aren't perfect. They make mistakes. They want to be able to go back and undo things. That's a natural thing. And also something that you might not think about or recognize is that if you have undo, it actually encourages people to explore your software more and become experts faster. Because how many of you read the manual? How many of you go to training, right? So a very small number of people will actually take the time to read any kind of training or manuals. And what they really would prefer to do is just jump right in and start using and learning as they go. And undo is a great pattern to help people to facilitate that, because as they realize, hey, I can try this and it's not going to screw me over, I can start trying more things, and they get more confidence, and then they'll try more new things and learn more a lot faster. So in terms of examples, this one is a simple, well, it's not really simple when you get into the details, but it's very familiar, is I guess what I'm trying to say, from Word. The interesting thing about undo is you have to figure out what kinds of actions need to be undone. For instance, in this case, it says typing undo pattern, right? So if I click undo on that, the whole undo pattern is going to be undone. It could have said typing U, typing N, typing D, typing O, typing space, all the way up, and let me undo every individual letter. And I suppose if I waited and typed A, typed B, I might want to do that. But what they're using here is this timing perspective, saying people aren't going to think in terms of, hey, every letter I type is something that I want to undo directly. If they're typing fast and then they stop, then that's sort of like a discrete unit of work in their mind. And that's probably, it's not 100%, probably what they would want to undo. So especially with these sort of like small incremental things, like if you're doing a graphics program and you're letting people draw a line, you're not going to say, point, 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 point. You're going to say undo line, because that's like a discrete unit of work in terms of what the users are thinking of. So if you have that kind of thing where it's incremental actions, even if, say, it was a data form and you're letting people input stuff, chances are they're not going to want to undo every particular change. They might want to undo the whole commit. And so in that case, you would let them save, and then maybe they can undo and go back to whatever happened before the save. So the key thing with effectively using undo is understanding what it is in your target audience's mind that constitutes these kinds of units of work. And then you can have multiple levels of undo. In this case, it's I'm typing, but maybe I'm typing, I save, I close, and then I decide later that I want to undo something like a whole document that I created or something like that. So, when you get into the undo pattern, it can be a little difficult, but it doesn't have to be. This is just another example using a graphics program. So before you saw, it's good if you're building out an undo history and you're going to actually show them the history to try to make it meaningful. This is kind of hard. I don't know exactly which pen tool meant what, but the nice thing is that I can take that slider and I can move it up and let go, and I can see the state it was at that point. Oh, that wasn't right. I can slide it back down, and you can kind of explore that way. It might be better if it, worked from a performance perspective to actually maybe like show a little thumbnail or something, but who knows. And for the people who do mostly data-centric applications, these are the kinds of undos that you're probably going to be dealing with. Someone creates a record, they delete a record, they update a record. You let them do it, no problem. You tell them that they did it. You give them that sort of confirmation that something happened. And then you say, hey, undo, or at least let them undo. So this is an example from Google Calendars. If you ever use Gmail, it's kind of a similar thing. You know, you just archive this. You can undo that if you want. So it's a really much better option than confirmation dialogues. And then real briefly, I just thought this was kind of interesting because as you get in there and you start thinking about these patterns, you know, you kind of find them in unexpected places. But really, the back, you know, forward journal navigation, this particular pattern, in a browser is a sort of undo. You're just undoing your navigation and you're redoing your navigation if you go forward. So that's it for just some sampling of patterns. There's lots of patterns out there. There's more than people have cataloged. But I wanted to go ahead and give you a taste of what we've done with Quince, because the whole point of our doing Quince was to make these patterns more usable. And by that, I don't mean usable in the formal sense, but just that you might be able to use them better on a day-to-day basis. So when you open Quince, this is kind of what you're going to see front and center using clear entry points. You can do a few things here. You can search keywords, and that searches against the full catalog. You can just start looking at all the patterns. See that transition there tells you that the search box is now up there and all your Explore options are over there. This is just the straight list of all the patterns. I think I already mentioned, you know, you can filter by tag, and then you could filter by alphanumeric. Now, within these lists where you see the patterns, if you think maybe that's not quite the pattern I'm looking for, or maybe you're just a curious kind of person, you can click Explore Related. And what that does is it brings up that pattern you were just looking up, and it says, hey, this pattern was tagged these things. Let me go out and find other patterns that were tagged that. And then patterns, in this case, for instance, if I go over here and say data types is tagged displaying complex data, well, other patterns that were tagged displaying concept data, complex data were also tagged this. And so you can kind of explore out from there and get an understanding of what kind of patterns are out there, what their relationships are. It was kind of interesting when we were building this out. This graph is not like something we hand drew. It's actually built from the data itself. So as we were tagging the patterns, they sort of just kind of fell into this natural organization, which, you know, is good. It makes sense. So it's kind of like a hierarchy. So you have these bigger ones. Again, it's sort of like a tag cloud, right? So the bigger bubbles and the bigger text indicate that there are more patterns with that tag, and we tell you how many there are. And but coming off of those bigger ones, there's smaller ones, and typically it's not 100%. They're sort of hierarchical relationships, saying that, you know, generically speaking, these are displaying complex data, but here's some specific ones about analysis. So it's kind of an interesting way to explore those and to explore related related patterns to a current pattern that you might be interested in. Now, the reason you might want to do that is two things. One is you might want to find alternatives. You know, maybe data types pattern didn't quite work for you, and you want to see what other patterns are in the same space that might work for me, so you can explore related that way. And then it may just be kind of one of the sort of like taking patterns to the next level and understanding them at a more holistic level is the relationships between the patterns themselves. And so this is one way to explore those relationships. You can see what patterns might typically play together with the data types pattern. So that's one way that we wanted to help people to find patterns that they're looking for. This other way is not actually original, even though I didn't intend to. I must have subconsciously seen it on Yahoo, so they have a similar approach. But the idea here is that you're exploring by user tasks. So you're thinking in terms of what your users are trying to accomplish. Maybe your users want to find stuff. Maybe they want to edit something. So we have these high-level sort of goals that they're trying to accomplish. And then within those, we show you the tags that are related to that. And then you can drill down and look, you know, at particular patterns for those tags. And it's a really good way, you know, if you're thinking in terms of requirements or use cases or something like that, to find patterns that sort of match what you're trying to achieve. This one is it's similar to the Explore related patterns. It uses the same metaphor, but it's just the holistic view of all the patterns in the catalog, what the tags are, how they're related. And so you can use this to just explore kind of willy-nilly and find things interesting, or maybe you just want to see what the different kinds of patterns are. And secret for this audience only, if you shake it around a bit, we do the wiggly thing again for you. A little Easter egg there. last way we do enable you to find patterns is through this thing that we call a wireframe map. A wireframe map is sort of like it sounds. It's a map that uses a wireframe as sort of the terrain, if you will. And within that terrain, we've tried to identify different patterns that might live in that particular terrain. So you can see here we have at the top, we have this sort of header area. It's pretty common, right? And then this is a simple 2-column layout, sidebar, and then the main content over here. So over here you'll see things that typically might show up in a sidebar, like a tag cloud, for instance. Up here you see global things that you might find usually up top. Often if you're doing an application, up top is the command area. You'll have toolbars or maybe the ribbon or something like that. If it's web or not, you often have global navigation up top, some kind of menu up there. And of course, ribbon goes up there too. Search is very often in the top right. It's just something that, and the thing about patterns is they just sort of bubble to the top, right? People try lots of different things, and people latch on to the ones that are good. And so that's one of the core things about trying to understand and use patterns is that it's not so much that you like it or that so-and-so used it. Like you might be tempted, you think, hey, I need to design a new homepage or something. How does Amazon do it? Or how does Apple do it or something like that? And that's a valid approach to go and look at what they're doing. But if you just try to take what they do and copy it, that it might not be the right thing for you. You need to kind of take it a little deeper, and that's where the patterns come in handy because they really take you down that path to really understand why it works for these people in their particular context. So maybe they have more data that they need to surface than you do, so you don't need to use the same pattern for your particular home site. So search, navigation tabs are often up in the top area. You can see breadcrumbs are often in somewhere around in that area. So this really actually works on two levels. One is that locational thing, and then the other level is the exemplification thing, and that's what we're doing here with things like modal panel. So we actually show you a modal panel, tell you it's called a modal panel, and that's the pattern, right? Over here, we're using extras on demand. So we say, hey, extras on demand, it's related to this. You click that, you see all the different patterns shown. So that's an implementation of extras on demand. Up here, hey, this is tab dialogues right here. And then we take it, well, these are ones related to tables, these are ones related to forms. Annotated scroll bar over here looks like a scroll bar, right? Faceted navigation, that's what that is over there on the right. So you can kind of see how this might be more of I can envision basically two ways that you would want to use this. One is that, hey, I know that this pattern is usually in the top area, so I know global navigation is usually up top, so I can just come here, look in the top area, see global navigation, but I might be like, what about the ribbon? Maybe you wouldn't have thought about the ribbon if you didn't come here and look at it in that way. And then the other way is just to sort of get a feel for where all these different patterns fit. You can see clear entry points is right here in the middle. Obviously, I had to do a lot of other stuff on here, so I couldn't make it a full implementation of clear entry points, but it kind of conveys that it's front and center. So those are the different ways that you can explore patterns. So that's part of Quince. The purpose of Quince is to kind of help you to use patterns on a day-to-day basis. I hope that people will, when you go to design your next UI, maybe you can come in here and actually use this, and it'll be like your first stop before maybe you go look at Amazon. Because why? Well, if you look at, say, the global navigation pattern, one of the things you might do as part of your design process is, even if you don't think of it in terms of patterns, you'll be like, well, I'll go look at these 5 sites and see how they do X, right? Well, if you come here and you find that as a pattern, we've already, not just us, but other people in the community have already said, hey, look, here's another example of that particular pattern. So, you can flip through on here, and you can see what we've got down here is the textual elements. So you can real easily start reading those. And the reason we designed this particular view this way is that, we support a more stereotypical way to view these patterns. If you click pop out, it's a standard HTML page. You've got the primary visualization up top. Then you can just read through, see the different examples at the bottom. And that may work for you, or maybe you want to print it out. This would be the way that you would go if you wanted to print a pattern out and read it. But what we were thinking here essentially is that if we've got the examples up top and they're always there, they're always front and center, right where you can see them, and then you can read through. And as you're reading through, you might be like, yeah, I see that in that particular example. And so you don't have to be scrolling back and forth to look at the different examples. It's both things are right there visible all the time. If it's scaled down too much where you can't really see it, simple thing, click through. You just use your keys to kind of look through all the examples in this particular one. You're done. You hit escape or close button. You get back here. So that we facilitate getting you to this information. We try to facilitate you to be able to understand and read through it. But we also hope that people will help us out, not us, but help the community out, because what we did is we went and we looked at some of the catalogs that are out there. We read books and things like that, and we found patterns that seem to be common among them all, that are well established. And we said, hey, we want this to be a community, a body of knowledge thing. But obviously, if we just stuck Quince out there and it was empty, it wouldn't be very valuable, right? So we're not trying to say that, hey, we're infragistics and this is the way you do everything. We're just saying, hey, we want to start a community here around patterns, and we've sort of jump-started the effort by putting these patterns in here. But if you want, you can just come in and sign in. Once you're signed in, then it opens up your ability to really collaborate with others on building out this body of knowledge. So simple way to kind of participate in this community is you're browsing around and you're like, hey, that's pretty cool. I think that's an implementation of a pattern probably. Maybe it's one you've seen. Maybe you think it's a pattern. Grab a quick screenshot. Come here, to that pattern. You browse. You uploaded it. You just add a little, hey, this is an implementation of this pattern. Check out how they do X. And then, of course, you might want to cite your source if you have one. And that immediately will upload it and share it with everyone else in the community. And if someone's subscribed to one of the feeds that surfaces new examples, then people will see the new examples as they come in. Another way to participate, which is fairly low bar in terms of effort, is to just, when you're looking at this catalog, if you use it or you have used it, then you just go down here and you can click, hey, I use this. I already did. That's why it's not available for me to click again, because what we're doing essentially is saying, the thing with patterns is not so much that I like it or I dislike it. It's, is it being used? Are a lot of people using it? Because if people are using it, that means it's probably working. And so rather than having sort of the thumbs up, thumbs down, we just said, really kind of the key thing is that people are using it. And then not only are they using it, but how are they using it? And so that's the other part of this from the field area, is that you can say, hey, I used this on this application I was building. I felt like, this particular part of the pattern was a little tough, and here's what I did. So you can real easy, 30 seconds or less, contribute to the community, help other people who might come and look at this pattern. Maybe it's some context or some rationale that wasn't addressed in the pattern text itself, and you can just quickly augment the pattern for other people's benefit. And the other way we use this, apart from just letting you know how many people are using it, is we've got the star rating up here. And that's intended to be a kind of level of confidence about this particular pattern. Now, the ones in there right now were all proposed by the Quince team, and that's what you can see here. This is where we work, is in the swimming pool. So all of the ones in there were proposed by us, and they were all existing patterns, pretty much all in other catalogs. We wrote all the content ourselves, but we use them as sources, and we cite them as sources when we wrote that information. So this one, for instance, was in 3 different sources, Jared Spool, Jennifer Tidwell, and Patterns in Interaction Design. So the point that I'm making with these all being 3-star is that they're all really established, and if you kind of hover over this thing, it'll tell you what the stars mean. 1 star means 10 people use it, 2 stars mean 20 have said they use it, and then 3 is sort of like the golden seal. And what we're doing is we're establishing a patterns council of people who either curate patterns libraries, or who are really kind of into patterns and they're knowledgeable about them. It's not just infragistics, it's a community thing. And then as new patterns are proposed, they start out with a 0 star, and then as people use them, they get more stars. And then the Patterns Council reviews, maybe cleans them up a little bit and says, yeah, this is the 3-star pattern. And so, the thinking there is that as we build out our body of knowledge more, you can use that as sort of a gauge to help you understand how used a pattern is. Of course, you can also look at the examples to kind of get a feel for that too. And then the other little piece of collaboration here is actually making suggestions to improve particular patterns. I don't know everything, obviously, and those of us who worked on writing these patterns did our best to understand them, to look at what other people have said about them, and sort of like incorporate that into what we wrote about them. But surely there's more to be said about them. And so that's where this could be better stuff is like if you've used it, or if you read it and you say, hey, you know what, you didn't consider this particular piece of context that really would invalidate the pattern for 300 people, you could put that there, and then other people can come and see that, and eventually, we might roll that back into the text itself. So those are different ways for you all to collaborate, help build out the body of knowledge. Again, like I said, it's not us trying to tell you how it is. We really want people to participate. Then, if you're just kind of curious and interested and want to keep a finger on what's going on, we've got different feeds. The Everything feed lets you subscribe to what it sounds like, everything. So you would get all new comments, all new examples, all new patterns. And then we have an all patterns if you're only interested in new patterns, and all examples if you're only interested in those. And lastly, if you're only interested in global navigation, you can just subscribe to stuff about that. Of course, we've got the ability to do different kind of standard, social bookmarking kind of things. You can share it with your friends. You can just copy and paste the URL, have us send them an email for you. That's standard sort of things, which is a pattern I intend to write, actually, called Share with Friends. But and the last thing before I wrap up this demo here is to propose a pattern. This is like the magnum opus of participating in the Quince community, because it's actually kind of hard to write a pattern. But if you're really into them and you do that, we would like to work with you on that. You upload it, you write it in Word, you upload it, we try to parse it out and get it right into the community. But if there's a problem, we'll be notified and help you work it out. So, and here's, if you want to just discuss patterns, we have a forum out there if you want to come and talk about them. Maybe you're not sure about something's a pattern you think someone should propose, or you don't have time and you just want to say, hey, this is a pattern, someone should do it. That would be a good place for that. And then some of the other standard stuff's there as well. So that's pretty much it for the Quince tool. Again, the key thing is that we hope people will be able to take advantage of this. It's free, 100%, and also to participate and build out the community. But Quince isn't the only resource out there for patterns. So one of the things I wanted to do is just to make you aware of some of the other resources. The books, there's those two I already mentioned. There's The Timeless Way of Building if you're interested in kind of the underlying theory behind patterns and why they work and why they should work. I highly recommend that. There's some websites out there. Obviously, these books, they have websites too. So again, I recommend both of these books. The Designing Interfaces one was done a few years back, but most of it's still good and valid, even though some of the examples are dated. Designing Web Interfaces was just released. Bill Scott actually spoke here at MIX. I think it was DHTML prototyping. So Designing Web Interfaces they take about 10 or 11 patterns, and then just really go deep on them and provide lots of different ways to implement them. So it's a good book. Yahoo, that's one of the most well-known existing pattern libraries out there. As you can see, they sort of organize it in that one way by doing the users need to kind of thing. They're totally focused on the web, so if that's what you're looking for, and they do have some, it's not .NET stuff, but they do have some assets as well. That reminds me, actually, plug Infragistics does implement some of these patterns that are in Quince, so we try to identify that in the examples where we can, so that helps you to implement them instead of having to re-implement them yourself. Wheelie or Wheeli, I don't actually know how to say it, but this is one of the most comprehensive online libraries out there. I recommend it, as a kind of a depth thing. They use the same Alexandrian format, similar at least. Another good site is UI Patterns, and the thing about UI Patterns is they've got some patterns. They've also got these things called screenshot collections, which are like just the examples part of it, really. So there's value in that itself, and in fact, Pattern Tap really kind of kicks that to the next level. That's all they do is take examples and put them out there and say, these are a bunch of examples of this pattern. They don't even, drill into helping you understand it, but there's a lot of value in just looking at what's out there. Lastly, if you're interested in open source, Fluid is a kind of a holistic project out there. They do have one for design patterns, and even if you're not interested in open source, they have a pretty good list of other patterns resources out there. And then in terms of RIA UX Patterns Explorers, there you go. Don't forget to complete your evaluation forms, and we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so question is specifically in the context of the web, but I think it applies pretty much anywhere. Where do you draw the line from help me again, what was the? Yeah, an animation transition. Where can you find the line between too much, where it starts getting in the way, and enough to actually do what transitions are supposed to do? That's just something you have to test, really. I mean, there are people who are experts in that kind of thing, and reading the pattern and trying to understand it. But really, what I recommend is one of the key things that you have to be careful with transitions is you might look at one specific transition and you think, hey, yeah, that feels right. You tweak the timing and blah blah blah. It feels good, but then you don't think about it in the context of the overall experience that people are having with that particular piece of software, and you may find that, in the context, you have 5 of these little things that on their own make a lot of sense, but they end up getting in the way because they're all together in kind of a cumulative effect of too much. So that's one thing you got to keep an eye out for. But there's no, golden rule. You have to do the transition you think makes sense, test it, tweak the timing, and then if you can, ideally do some usability testing on that and get actual user feedback as to how they feel about it. And then, of course, over time, people will give you that feedback if it's, if they're using the application as well. There's no golden rule for that one. Anyone else? Yes. Right. So, question is it possible to sort of have a private local instance for Quince on something that you're working on? Talk to me afterwards. The answer is not right now, but it's something that we want to explore with people. So I'd like to get your information. So you're interested in the code and all that? Right now, we're not releasing the code for Quince. We are releasing a couple of the controls, one of which is the little graph control that you saw for the relationships. So we're going to release that as a community control here pretty soon. So, but no, not right now. We may blog and stuff about some of the high level. Like I can tell you, we use model view view model, in terms of the architecture. We used, drawing a blank, WCF. Astoria, I forget what it's called now, what the final word is for it, but high-level architectural details, no problem. You can even send an email to me, Ambrose at Infragistics, and I'll get what I can for you if it's more of an architectural question. Anybody else? Don't be shy. All right, well, I'm here for a few more minutes if you want to come up, if you don't want to ask in front of everybody. Thank you very much.